for joining us this morning for the presentation of the 25-26 governor's budget. I'd like to open by saying, obviously, the governor's total focus now is on the communities and residents of the state who have been impacted by the devastating wildfires, and including, in addition to the governor, obviously the entire administration shares that focus, including his office and the Department of Finance. And just would like to say, with everything that's gone on in the last couple of days, as we are working to help do all that we can, but also thinking about the devastating impacts that are taking place in the state and the people and communities that are impacted. Just want to acknowledge our staff at the Department of Finance who, through this, have adjusted given the circumstances, but also remain focused on the core mission that we have of meeting the constitutional requirement to present the governor's budget today. So I'd like to acknowledge and thank all the staff at the Department of Finance for the utmost professionalism that they always show to get our duties accomplished. With that, special thanks to Chief Deputy Director for Budget, Erica Lee, who's joining me at the table today, to our program budget managers who are joining us today in the room and who will be available to help answer questions afterward, and to the entire executive team for the Department of Finance that are here today. Also would like to thank the Governor's Office for being the great partners that they always are in accomplishing the task of creating and presenting the governor's budget, and also all of the agencies and departments who we work with. So with that said, we will get into our responsibilities of presenting the budget today. We start off, some of what you'll see, obviously, the governor went over on Monday, but we will provide additional detail today. First, would like to just start off by acknowledging generally that thanks to the budget framework that the governor proposed last May, to not only, as we were dealing with a significant budget shortfall, to not only balance the budget for the fiscal year that we are budgeting for the upcoming fiscal year, but also ensure that our special fund for economic uncertainty was balanced for the next fiscal year, and through the work with the legislature and them adopting that framework in the final budget, we really went a long way in moving California back onto some stable fiscal footing, and this budget reflects that. As you all will recall, the last two budgets really were built on frameworks around solutions to address significant budget problems. We were reductions, delays, fund shifts, and things of that nature, and this is not required for this budget. Similar to the LAO, as we have built the budget remained balanced, and the LAO, I think, acknowledged that in their estimate, in their fiscal outlook, that the budget remained roughly balanced, the budget remained balanced, and in the upcoming fiscal year, and that is in large part due to the work to balance over 2 years in the current budget. Really made great strides over where we've been the last couple of years to where we are now. No need for additional solutions in this budget above what was agreed to in the 24 budget agreement, and we reflect a modest surplus in the governor's budget. So the next two slides, the governor obviously went over on Monday and has gone over in previous budget presentations, but particularly in the last couple of years and still now, we think these are important slides to really show what the state has experienced in the last couple of years. It not only shows kind of historic volatility, but really the extreme volatility that we experienced in the last couple of years. And a couple other, I think, points to make in addition to the great points that the governor has made on these slides in the past is that really when you look at the orange line and the volatility in the revenues, really a reflection of the fact that our revenues don't necessarily always track completely with the underlying economy, and are really a reflection of the reliance on high income earners and the impacts of the performance of the stock market. So you see that here in the revenue volatility that we've experienced, and then also in the next slide as it pertains to capital gains. And you can see the spikes in capital gains that have happened going back over the last over 20 years now, and what's happened after those spikes, and then particularly what we saw after the spike in 2021, where capital gains spiked to an all-time high of percentage of personal income to 11.6%, and what we dealt with afterwards. And I think it's important to show now, maybe even more so, given what we're going through, because when we were reconciling the correction we had in revenues after that spike, our budget problem was exacerbated somewhat by the IRS tax filing delay that we faced, and which really impacted our ability to accurately forecast and understand where revenues were headed. And just making that point because obviously we were likely to face similar delays in the future. So the governor mentioned this at his preview, and thought it was important to point out again after we've seen the evidence of the volatility that we've dealt with in the last couple of years, that we've talked about this the last couple of years, but this year the governor's budget does include a proposal to reform Proposition 2 from 2014, which set the current rules for deposits into the budget stabilization account, which is the state's rainy day fund. And there are two specific reforms that we will be seeking. Number one, increasing the cap of general fund revenues from 10 to 20% that's deposited into the BSA, and then also to exclude deposits into the BSA from the state appropriations limit. This will enable us to save a lot more during the upswings and be able to provide a more stable management of our funds going forward to protect the programs and services that Californians rely upon. So again, just a reminder of some of the top lines of the budget. Governor went over these, some of these on his preview, but $322.3 billion total spending, balanced budget. 228.9 billion of that is general fund, and then total reserves of just a tick under $17 billion. That includes 10.9 billion in the rainy day fund, 1.5 billion in the schools rainy day fund, and then 4.5 billion in the special fund for economic uncertainty. As the governor mentioned at his preview, that 4.5 billion is roughly $1 billion higher than the SFEU that was included in the 2024 Budget Act. The rainy day fund again is balances after the planned 7.1 billion in an additional withdrawal in the budget year, which was part of the 2024 two-year plan, to rather than withdraw the total amount that was allowable at the time in 1 year, to spread that out over 2 years, to really as part of that 2-year view and effort to balance over the 2 years. So Governor also mentioned that revenues, general fund revenues, prior to any new policies are up by 16.5 billion in the budget window. The budget window is the prior fiscal year, the current fiscal year that we're in, and the upcoming fiscal year, and all those impact the bottom line of what's available in the budget year and upcoming fiscal year. And so general fund revenues, as compared to the 2024 Budget Act, are up by 16.5 billion. This, want to make the point that we are very similar to the LAO in terms of our revenue projections here. And even though from the big three, which is what the LAO updated in their fiscal outlook in November, they updated their, at the same time as the fiscal outlook in November, they updated their estimates of revenue from the big three. In the budget window, we are 8.2 billion. We are 8.2 billion higher than the LAO, but as the slide indicates, that's 1.4% of total revenue. So we really are seeing things similarly in terms of where revenues are, and that difference is not really significant on a percentage basis of total revenue. So after the 2-year budget framework, so after accounting for all of the actions that were included as part of the 2024 budget agreement, the budget reflects the modest surplus of $363 million. The slide kind of outlines how we get to that the modest surplus. The bottom line is you start with our SFEU from the current budget, account for all the changes since then, mainly the changes in revenue. You can see the 16.5 billion there that talked about in the previous slide, changes in expenditure, and then once you also account for the level of SFU that we have included in the upcoming budget, 4.5 billion, you get to the discretionary surplus of $363 million. I know these, we've got the governor and we've received a number of questions on how our current estimates compare to the LAO. I mean, I again say that there's not a big difference in where we see things and where the LAO see things. In terms of the $2 billion that they referenced in their fiscal outlook versus the 363 million surplus that we have, we, given the question, provide a breakdown of the differences here. And just really the bottom line is the biggest difference here, as you can see, is in revenues, where total revenues, not just from the big three, we're 9.4 billion higher than LAO, and that is kind of the biggest difference between where we land and where the LAO lands. Again, we're not that far away from each other. So, given how far we've come in the last couple of years in addressing the significant shortfalls that we faced, and now being in a place where we are a lot better off than the last couple of years, we're not facing a budget shortfall. We do recognize that we still have work to do to ensure long-term sustainability and other pressures going forward, and we are limiting new investments in this budget above baseline investments, which we'll talk about in a second. And so total workload and discretionary new spending in the budget is approximately $1.2 billion. This would be for things like supporting enacted legislation, providing support for existing programs who have funding that's expiring, or things such as ongoing IT projects. So in addition to kind of where we are and having the balanced budget in the upcoming fiscal year, we do recognize that we are seeing some significant growth in some of our baseline programs, and that carries out into the out years, and that there are there's growth above what we see as normal revenue growth in the out years, and this is gonna drive the need for us to continue to assess those ongoing and out years spending pressures, and we will make the necessary adjustments at the May revision. So next, I'll go over some of the governor's budget highlights again, and you all have the overview document. There is very limited new commitments in this budget. It really is balanced, but we recognize the need to also remain fiscally prudent, and again, ensure that we're setting ourselves up for long-term stability here. But there are some of the highlights of the budget, particularly some of the new things in the budget I will go over next. The first one for Prop 98, the governor did preview this in his preview of the top line. The guarantee level for Prop 98 in the budget year is 118.9 billion. You can see the growth here from 2015-16. For the current year, the guarantee level is 119.2 billion, and for the prior fiscal year, the guarantee level is 98.5 billion. Excuse me. Would note that this is over those 3 years, the guarantee is increased by 7.5 billion. There is one adjustment in the budget where in the current year, where the guarantee level is 119.2 billion, we are proposing to appropriate 1.6 billion less in the current year, and this is in recognition of the revenue volatility that we experience, and we will continue to monitor this going forward, and eventually this would be addressed when we have to certify the current year in the spring of 2026. Lastly, just note total funding for TK to 12 schools in the budget year is 137.1 billion. So again, these next couple of slides, the governor went over, so I won't spend too much time on them, but just will note again that we are in the education world meeting significant transformational milestones in the budget year. This includes, as the governor noted, full implementation of universal kindergarten, transitional kindergarten, 1.8 billion in additional money in the budget year for that, $5 billion total. Implementation of before and after in summer school programs, 435 million in budget for that. 4.4 billion total, feeding nearly 1 billion, serving nearly 1 billion meals in the budget year, and then also the full implementation of screening for risk of reading difficulties for all K through second grade students. In addition, implementation of grants for more than 2,000 community schools, the literacy roadmap, and then the implementation of children youth behavioral initiatives to allow schools to reimburse for student behavioral health services. A couple other points, the governor also made some of these, but with a little bit more detail, the COLA is 2.43%. This equates to approximately 2.5 billion. We are including a discretionary block grant of 1.8 billion to allow LEAs additional support to address some of the rising costs pressures that they're facing. $500 million for literacy and mathematics coaches. This continues to build upon existing program and add mathematics coaches there. $378.6 million for learning recovery emerging block grant to help establish learning recovery programs through the 27-28 fiscal year, and then the additional funding for teacher recruitment of $300 million. The governor also mentioned master plan for career education. There is funding in the budget for this, including $100 million in Prop 98 in community colleges budget for the credit for prior learning and career passport components. There's $5 million for GovOps agency to do statewide planning and coordination. And then there's $4 million for labor agency to support regional coordination efforts. Next, just notes that obviously the two bonds related to climate and education passed in November. For the climate bond, the budget will be proposing $2.7 billion for projects in the budget year, and have discussions with legislature on those, as well as additional allocations. But this also includes $1.5 billion for wildfire and forest resilience projects that will, the programs that we'll talk more about in a second. Education bond, $1.5 billion for 2025-26 for TK-12 schools, and this is more of a normal allocation level for schools in fiscal year, and then $51.5 million for community college projects. So obviously, given the current circumstances, we wanted to highlight the significant investments that have been made in the budget by this administration to address wildfire risks. First, to supporting wildfire resilience, there's a total of $2.5 billion for prior investments. This included $200 million that's annual through 28-29. The $200 million, approximately $200 million, was what existed when this administration began, and then over the last few years, an additional $2.5 billion has been invested, and then there's a proposed in the budget, as we mentioned, $1.5 billion in additional investments from the climate bond. In addition to this funding, there's been significant fundings for other aspects of preparedness or response, including purchasing of acquiring 16 new state-of-the-art helicopters and 7 C-130 air tankers. Additionally, CAL FIRE's firefighting capacity has been expanded significantly over the last few years. Since 2018-19, it's essentially doubled. We added now have 1.3 billion ongoing added, and 2,400, approximately 2,400 new firefighters. Also, significant investments in technology for advanced mapping and detection cameras, and then also tools for real-time intelligence. Next, talk about some of the tax-related proposals or revenue-related proposals that are in the proposed budget. First one, everybody's aware of, Governor spoke about at the preview, the film tax credit expansion again, raising it from the current $330 million level to $750 million. We're also including a exclusion for military retirement income up to $20,000, and it also, there's also a income threshold for filers with joint filers up to $250,000, single filers to $125,000. This proposal is expected to reduce revenue by approximately 130 million in the budget year and 85 million ongoing. We also are including a wildfire settlement income inclusion that will provide tax relief for wildfire victims. This is for the 2025 through 2029 tax year. We are also including a mandatory single sales factor for financial institutions. So this changes the factors financial institutions use when estimating the taxes in California, and it moves them to the process that is currently required of most all other industries, and essentially addresses the issue where California located companies are end up being disproportionately harmed, if you will, by the current structure. And this change in the calculation doesn't change any tax rates, but this change in the calculation is expected to result in additional revenue of 330 million in the budget year and 250 million ongoing. So getting close to the end here. Again, this is a slide from the governor's presentation. Just want to note that we continue to work on government efficiencies. This shows where we are in terms of the vacant positions and the operational efficiencies that are reflected in the budget. This represents all funds over the 2 years, but also want to note here that as we implemented the efficiencies and the vacant position initiatives, we exempted 24/7 posted positions and also positions that were essential for life and safety, including firefighting positions at CAL FIRE. There were, and also would reiterate for the vacant positions that these are eliminations of positions that have been vacant, that are not filled and not performed duties. But beyond that, CAL FIRE, firefighting, emergency response, the positions related to anything related to health and safety were exempted. There was a small efficiency reduction related to admin resources at CAL FIRE, but want to note here that obviously, given the circumstances, we are exempting CAL FIRE from any efficiency reductions, and ensuring that they will have all the resources that they need as we move forward and deal with the current circumstances. Also would note, included in the exempting of 24/7 critical health and safety resources is CHP. So a couple of other just notes on some other new funding or other funding in the governor's budget. There's an additional 60 million for additional round of Cal Competes grants. There is 25 million to support a chip design and collaboration facility in Sunnyvale that the state was awarded, and there is up to 7.4 million in the budget year, growing to a little bit over 12 million to provide a 3-month supply of diapers to all babies born in the state. So lastly, and then we'll open it up for questions. Obviously we are in, as mentioned, a lot better shape. Revenues, besides remaining balanced, due to the, 2-year, frame that was, included in the current budget, revenues are up, and that's also, a reflection of, a growing economy and, seeing, in our forecast, seeing some good signs on the, economic front that, also influence our, revenue projections. But with that said, we, do understand that there are always risks, and some of the current risks that we are facing include the stock market volatility. Obviously, noted earlier, a lot of the, volatility on income is driven by, the performance of the stock market, and so any changes there, could have an impact on revenues here in California. As the governor has mentioned, also the uncertainty around federal policy, tariffs, and, immigration policy obviously could, have some impact in California, in particular on tariffs. Ports, Oakland, Long Beach, LA, the logistics industry, Inland Empire, all could be, impacted, by, some of the, tariff policies that we've heard, may be coming from the, incoming federal administration. Then even outside of, potential impacts of tariffs, immigration policy on, cost and inflation, we know we've seen recently, some, indications that the feds may slow down in their rate cuts, and so just, any sustained, elevated inflation, and the subsequent restrictive policies by the Fed, could also begin to, show in our economy here in the state and our revenues. And then lastly, mentioned at the beginning, and we've talked about before, at the, in 2023, we had the, at the time, unprecedented, IRS tax delay, that impacted essentially the entire state. And, our, deadline was extended, eventually extended all the way through, November. That, as mentioned at the beginning, was done at a time when, we were, having a significant revenue correction, and really just added, another significant layer of uncertainty and complexity to our revenue forecast, and impacted the budget challenges that we faced in the last couple of years. And so we, do recognize that there is likelihood that we are gonna face additional tax delays, due to disasters going forward. With that, again, I just wanna thank, all of our staff, Department of Finance, the governor's office, the governor, the entire administration, and, we look forward to, this is the governor's proposal, and we look forward to working with the legislature over the coming months to, get to a final budget for the state of California for the 25-26 fiscal year. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Taryn Luna with the LA Times. Can you guys explain the 6,500 jobs being permanently deleted in comparison to the 10,000 that was announced the same time last year?
Yeah, so the, 10,000 was estimate that was, that we spoke about at the Budget Act. Since the budget has been enacted, we have spent, a lot of time working with our departments and agencies, and again, as I mentioned, during the slide that referenced those 6,500 vacant positions, we went through the steps of working with all departments and agencies and understanding what, should or shouldn't be included, and that's where you get to, when you start excluding things such as the, fire safety, required positions, then, what we felt was reasonable, to include at this point to reduce they can position buy and ensure we're not having, significant impacts on, programs and services the state is 6,500.
So instead of 10,000, now it's 6,500?
Correct.
Okay, and then help me understand just kind of big picture, how can the state justify declaring a budget emergency and taking money from the rainy day fund at a time when we say the economy is doing better than expected and we have higher revenues than expected?
So it goes back to, we have to understand the budget framework for 2024. That was the dealing with the shortfall and the correction that we are facing. We were seeing multiple year impacts, and the amount that we're withdrawing is part of the amount that was allowable to withdraw in the 2024 Budget Act. Instead of taking it all in 1 year and doing what is more prudent fiscal management, we spread that withdrawal out over 2 years. And the actions that we took associated with the 2024 Budget Act balanced the state budget over 2 years. There are other actions that are included in the budget that are associated with that 2024 budget agreement, and this is one of them. So, and would also say that it's the budget stabilization account by its nature is set up now. The deposits are set up to capture capital gains during times where capital gains spike, and in recognition of the volatility there, and to be able to use that to help protect programs and services during downtime times, and that's exactly what we have done here with our plan on how we're using the reserves.
Okay, then to that end, I just have some questions to clarify this to readers. So if we're talking about 25, 26, cutting that budget in 24 budget planning, can we legally do that, or is this all proposed and hasn't actually been taken effect yet?
I'm not sure I understand.
So last June, when we said we're gonna preemptively cut the 25, 26
We
budget.
did not cut a 25, 26 budget last June, we planned. So
Right.
we cut the 24 budget last year, but we had a 2-year plan, because we could estimate, we're required to include out years in our budget forecast and our multi-year estimates. And so we had the estimate of not only what the budget problem was in the upcoming fiscal year at the time, but also in out years. And so we planned to ensure that we were not only balancing for the budget year, the current year, but the next year. So we planned, and so that plan included a number of actions that now need to be taken during the 25, 26 fiscal year.
That's how I understand it too, so then I'm confused. So when we're talking about a deficit right now, which we typically right now have a point in time look at either a surplus of a deficit, we're talking about we're having a surplus, a moderate surplus of 380 million. But right now, actually, we have a deficit because those plans have not been enacted into law, right?
So, we have a surplus after accounting for all of the actions that were part of the 2024 budget agreement.
But have not been enacted. So what is the point in time where we're at right now in January surplus or deficit number?
It's the 363 million that I referenced earlier. We are all of the things that we planned for in 2024 that were part of the agreement, we are assuming those are part of our baseline, and so we're building the budget from there, and based on that, we have the modest surplus of 363 million.
Is that a change from prior budget strategy, where in January we were saying whether we had a deficit or surplus in X amount, not based on plans, but on the reality of economic situation?
There have been numerous times in the past where we make agreements as part of budget acts that have to be reflected in subsequent budget acts.
In January that reflected, so the budget deficit changes in January, like we've had this exact same scenario before? Cause I've talked to experts who said we haven't, and it feels like this year, we're projecting a surplus based on, in the reality, in the moment, that we don't have.
Okay, so I don't think we've ever, when we face such a significant budget shortfall, that we've ever balanced over 2 years, and so that's unprecedented. So we are in an unprecedented budget times here, but based on what we did and the prudent fiscal planning that we did in 2024, and accounting for all of the agreements as part of the 2024 Budget Act, we are where we are.
I guess it's just hard, cause we're saying we have to dip into the rainy day because we have a deficit for 24-25, but in this moment, we have a surplus, so it's hard to explain all of that with readers without being able to say the overall deficit number that they're solving for 25-26 is X, even though they've done work and agreed to cut out a certain amount of it, right? So I think that that's where the difference is in terms of trying to explain it to readers or people when we've taken those kind of, made the adjustments now for.
Yeah, so I
Plan
think
cuts.
the basic answer is, there was an agreement at 2024 Budget Act. After that agreement, I am explaining to you where things stand. And accounting for that agreement is not unprecedented. We often account for, agreements as part of budget acts that still need to be enacted in subsequent budgets.
Hi, Director, thanks for the presentation. Stella Yu with Cal Matters. I just wanted to say, kind of like piggybacking on Karen's question. So, when it comes to the drawing down from the rainy day fund, I mean, the governor has talked about uncertainties laying ahead with, the federal, administration potentially withholding disaster aid in the future. We're also, seeing all the kind of economic risks that you're talking about. Why still go ahead with withdrawing this year, knowing that we only have a modest surplus and we might have to spend more money on wildfires or all these other risks?
Again, I would go back to, we actually were exercising prudent fiscal management by not withdrawing the entire amount that we could have withdrawn in the current fiscal year, and we spread that out over 2 fiscal years. And what that allowed us to do was to enact other solutions over the 2 years that helped really deal with the underlying shortfall that we were seeing, rather than using the entire amount from the reserve in one fiscal year.
And to that, so you actually mentioned, the governor is proposing a reform of Prop 2. So my understanding is that it would require a ballot measure that goes to the voters. How, is something already in the works? How are you planning to make that happen?
Yes, it would require going back to voters, and we will have a proposal that's associated with the budget, and then we'll have the discussions over the coming months with the legislature on the exact process of how that will take place.
And another question with, for the wildfire, settlement tax inclusion. So you mentioned that would apply, to fiscal year, tax year 2025 to 29. So how much money are we, expecting, given the scope of even just the wildfires this week?
So we wouldn't actually project an impact to our state revenues based on this proposal, because we don't plan for revenues from settlements going forward. So there's no expected revenue built into our planning, and so there wouldn't necessarily be an impact from the proposal.
Mm-hmm. And my last question for you, so on Prop 36, are we anticipating, reopening a prison or prisons to accommodate for the projected increase in the number of inmates? And I did see that the budget for CDCR is going to be cut mildly. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I was wondering, given the fiscal impact of Prop 36, why still cut the budget? Are we anticipating a reopening of prison?
So we are managing that, the projected impact, just over 1,600 inmates, within the current plan, and that also includes some of the reductions to CDCR. That those reductions are primarily associated with the 2024 budget agreement and the efficiency reductions that were included there. So we are managing both of those at the same time, and that plan is reflected in the governor's budget. We will also obviously have to continue to monitor the exact impact, the projection at the time of Prop 36. And if there are necessary adjustments going forward, of course, we'll make those.
Hi, Sophia Bolai with the San Francisco Chronicle. Wanted to get a little bit more detail on these potential tax collection delays. So when you are talking about disasters that might result in the kind of delays we saw 2 years ago, are you just thinking of the LA County fires right now, or are there other disasters that you anticipate would potentially cause delays?
So from the experience that we had, with essentially 99% of the state being delayed, and really understanding the process now from the IRS and what is happening not only here but in other states. I think we're better prepared now to understand what the impacts might be. We did adopt a proposal last year that gives us discretion now on whether we have to conform or not every time. But with that said, currently there's a major disaster declaration for the LA wildfires, and so that is likely going to trigger some sort of tax filing delay from the IRS. So we do anticipate one happening from these wildfires. We are not anticipating any others at this moment that I'm aware of.
Got it. And would you, based on what you've learned in the last couple of years, do you anticipate it would just be for LA County at this point, given the fire situation, or do you think it would be more widespread in the region?
So it would be, it would apply to the counties that are included in that declaration. So.
Okay, understood. And in terms of, you mentioned that you learned a lot since the last time there was a major delay that resulted in, or at least contributed to major budget deficits that you guys then had to solve for. Would you approach a similar delay differently, and how would you approach it differently? Can the people of California expect that we're going to have more deficits as a result of this, or is there anything you can do to prevent that?
Yeah, and so the real impact of the delays doesn't really impact the overall size of a potential deficit or surplus, but what it does is it creates a higher level of uncertainty, clouds our ability to accurately predict or estimate revenues and complete our revenue projections. And so I guess in my mind, couldn't happen at a worse time when it did happen in 2023 for the 2022 tax year, because of, as I talked about at the beginning with the capital gains slide, because it happened at a time when right after we had that significant spike and when we were correcting, and so it just added on to a higher level of uncertainty in a time that we knew we were in one of those instances of some significant swings in our overall revenue. I think the things are different now, where if you looked at that slide again, we are projecting more steady growth going forward, and so there's not a lot of as much of downside risk as existed during the previous delay. Also, again, that delay applied to essentially the entire state. Now, even though LA County, surrounding counties are a significant portion of the state, we're not, at least at this point, anticipating that the delay would impact as many taxpayers as it did in the prior delay.
And understood that this is, obviously the fires are not reflected at all in the budget document that we're, talking about today, because they just broke out. But beyond this likely delay that we're talking about, how else do you anticipate that the fires could affect the state budget?
So, unfortunately, we are, fires and natural disasters is something that we have been having to deal with for a number of years now, and we have our mechanisms in the budget to deal with them, and so we are, a lot of it is really in the response recovery activities, and that's where money comes from special account within our SFEU, and that's one of the reasons that that the governor is including a higher SFEU this year. And, but then a lot of those, costs are reimbursed by the federal government, and I think this, the governor, federal government just announced yesterday, I think it was full reimbursement for the first 180 days, so, obviously, that will be a big help to our state. In terms of the overall cost from this particular, emergency, we're in the mode now of ensuring that our communities are safe, and we are beginning to assess, but it will obviously take some time for us to really know what the kind of true impacts are from a fiscal perspective.
Thank you.
I'm Angela Hart with KFF Health News. I'm hoping someone can help me understand some of the details in the homelessness section. The top lines reference $100 million in the encampment resolution grants. Is that the entirety of state funding that's currently unspent and on the table, or is there still existing HAP funding or other funding that's available?
Yes, there's still rounds of HAP that still are scheduled to go out, so there is additional funding that's previously been approved that will still be allocated.
What dollar amount is that?
I don't have the dollar amount over off the top of my head, but we can get it to you shortly after this event.
Okay, that would be great. And then also references that the governor is open to working with the legislature for additional proposals for funding on homelessness. Does the governor have any additional ideas about additional homelessness funding to address the crisis?
Obviously, this has been a priority of the governor and the administration and remains one. What's reflected in the document, in the 8 pages, we know we're gonna anticipate additional resources going forward, but what's reflected in the 8 pages is that in those discussions on those additional resources, we really want to ensure that there is a higher level of accountability, and that's really the focus of the governor's budget at this time, knowing that we are going to have discussions on, we have to have discussions on additional resources to combat this issue.
So new funding and that's on top of the HAP and the ESG money and the encampment resolution
Well,
grant.
the additional accountability for new funding.
I'm asking, so you're saying there is a potential for new state funding to address homelessness on the table, even though it's not called out
I
here?
would say on the table, there is, but we know that we are gonna have to have discussions on new funding. We acknowledge that. And what the 8 pages, lays out is that in those discussions, the administration is, seeking additional, accountability of any new funding in this area.
Thank you. I see that too, that in order to receive is it current and potentially future state funding that local governments have to have a local encampment policy? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanna make sure, so that's for current funding and potential future funding.
I'm not looking at the text now. I know it's for potential future funding, and for existing. Yes.
Okay. Do you have the details of those local encampment policies? What do those require specifically?
I don't have them right now, but that's something that we can, we are, I think first we'll have to have, discussions with the legislature, on, regarding this additional accountability, and I think that those details probably will, emerge after we have some of those discussions.
Okay, so that's not set in stone, that's not outlined yet in state policy?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, I would like to have that conversation. Looks like there's a lot of unanswered questions, so for future, just for reference, that would be great to maybe have an offline discussion about that with someone who can explain that to me. And then just one more question about this new homelessness agency, the Department of Housing and Homelessness Agency that the state is gonna create. It looks like it's going to sort of look at policies and funding across different departments, is that correct? Is there new funding that's gonna be attached to that, or new policies, or is it really just sort of amalgamating state funding and policies across different current agencies?
The vision would be to have that, ensure that the state agency that is solely focused with this mission that would, enhance the coordination of all of the efforts out there. With that said,
Armed man shot
we are
after he
acknowledging
approaches
the
officer
agencies,
making
but the
traffic stop in
actual,
Denard. Utah police says.
proposal to create the new agency for housing, both housing and, consumer services will be going through the Little Hoover process.
Right, but so it's a new state agency, the state's creating a new homelessness agency to connect current agencies, am I understanding that correctly?
Current programs related to housing and how those programs are, administered either within the new agency or across agencies.
And it says healthcare too, so for example, CalAIM, there's a major component of CalAIM which addresses homelessness. So would this new agency be able to really look at CalAIM from those two, like, health and homelessness perspectives, or would it be like would it be new responsibilities and new funding? I'm confused about that still.
So I think because there's the whole process that needs to be, completed to actually establish the new agency, and some of the questions you're asking are getting, out ahead of that process a bit. The vision is to be able to, better coordinate from one single entity at the state across all those programs, which would include the CalAIM program. With that said, there is a process that still needs to be, completed to understand exactly how some of those details will be, fleshed out.
Okay, thank you.
Antonio Harvey, California Black Media. Just had a question about the film and television tax credit expansion. Seemed like the jumping from $400 to $420 million, 303, what's that, 330